Camille Dardens. Growing up in Chicago, Camille Dardens was raised in an upper-middle-class household. She was praised for having a natural beauty, intelligence, and talent. Camille excelled in academics as well as sports. She attended ballet for 9 years, excelled academically, and skated ice hockey at a semi-professional level. She was 21 years old when she started to get enthralled with Gary Dodson's news stories. Gary Dodson was a notorious rapist who was found guilty, but his accuser changed his narrative and acknowledged Gary's innocence. Camille made the decision to go to Gary's hearing and spoke with him for a short while. From the moment he was freed, the two were romantically involved. It was like a fairy tale to Camille. Their 1985 wedding made headlines, and they were even discussed on Good Morning America. Their financial situation was also looking excellent because Gary's bogus accuser authored a book and gave him the revenues. Then, Ashley became Gary and Camille's first and only child. Although Camille was experiencing the life of her dreams, however, things quickly turned bad. Before long, Gary had blown all their money and was looking for ways to drink more. He would grow more aggressive towards Camille after drinking. In addition, he received multiple DUIs and got into pub brawls. When Camille finally had enough, she pursued a divorce. To get as far away from Gary as possible, she and Ashley relocated to Las Vegas. She was having a really difficult time making ends meet at the moment. Camille had very little work experience and no formal schooling. She began dancing in a number of neighborhood strip clubs. The Crazy Horse, owned by a mobster named Jack Collardi, was one of the clubs. Working at these clubs, Camille began abusing cocaine and marijuana. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free. Now, let's move on with the video. George Cruz Diaz Jr. was the man Camille fell in love with. After they were married, Camille even got the name Cruz tattooed on her hip. Still, the marriage was not a happy one. After Cruz began abusing her, Camille developed a severe cocaine dependence. Barbara, Camille's mother, made the decision to return to Chicago, bringing Ashley along. Camille would never again be seen by Ashley and Barbara. For Camille, things only got worse. A series of drug-related accusations led to many arrest warrants for her. Her substance misuse also caused discoloration of her teeth. Camille grew quite afraid and suspicious. She confessed to her companions that she was terrified of someone and that she was being followed. Sadly, though, she never provided any information. Sadly, nobody seemed to notice Camille's disappearance, so it's unclear exactly when she vanished. We know that it happened in 1994. After moving back to Las Vegas, Camille's mother, Barbara, and Ashley learned that Camille had not been seen in almost 7 months. A complaint of a missing person was made, but the police showed little interest in it. Barbara had no choice but to go looking for her daughter alone. Seeking to find out if anyone had heard from Camille, she made her way from club to club. Posters are put up and residents are questioned. When Sherry, Camille's childhood friend, learned that Camille was missing in 2003, she contacted the police to find out if there had been any developments. When she learned there had been no investigation, she was shocked. A few weeks after it was submitted, Camille's missing persons report was inexplicably removed by an official in the police department. Is there any chance that this is a cover-up? Around the time of her disappearance, Camille had spent time with a police officer. Officer William Brooks might have been a police officer. The cop was a frequent club-goer and died in prison for trafficking in cocaine. This could be the reason behind the report's inexplicable deletion. Ashley provided the authorities with her DNA in the event that they discovered an unidentified body. Camille had broken up with Cruz at the time of her disappearance, but their marriage had never ended in divorce. She and Francisco Kiko Fernandez had an apartment at 2110 Paradise Road, Suite 26. Francisco periodically departed the United States to return to his native Cuba. Francisco may or may not have smuggled Camille out of the nation. Barbara once visited a psychic who told her Camille was still alive and hidden abroad. It is significant to remember that Francisco's criminal history includes multiple counts of domestic abuse. Cruz, Camille's second husband, was subsequently found guilty of attempting murder and is unwilling to communicate with Camille's family. Additionally, a tip was received stating that the sender thought Camille was killed by a one-percenter biker gang and buried in the desert. Because of her high-risk lifestyle, it's also highly plausible that it was just an isolated attack on her. One of Camille's close associates asserts that she frequently discussed being contacted by law enforcement to serve as a confidential informant against the mob-affiliated proprietors of the Crazy Horse, the place of employment. Maybe the mafia intended to quiet Camille after learning that she had given the police information about them. This argument would be completely supported by the FBI number that was one of the numbers in her phone under the name Dimitri. Ashley and some of her pals began their own investigation because it didn't seem the police wanted to. Friends and strangers began to join the search party, and it grew larger and larger. Ashley's friend contacted me lately, requesting that I write about this issue in order to increase awareness and bring in new perspectives. The police are forced to conduct their own independent hunt for Camille since they merely don't care. Ashley deserves to know what happened to Camille since she misses her mother a lot. I kindly request that everyone see this video and spread the word about this case. To solve this case, just one individual needs to come forward. In addition, I'll include a link to a Facebook page where you may find out more details about this case and even offer research assistance. If you know anything, even if you believe it to be very unimportant, please send them an email at findcamille@yahoo.com. Camille was a Caucasian female with hazel eyes and brown hair. Her height was 5 feet 7 inches, and her weight ranged from 125 to 145 pounds. Her nose was fractured a few weeks ago, and her teeth were a little discolored. She had the name Cruz tattooed on her right hip. She went by Nicole, Renee, or Kim for her first name, and Clark or Diaz for her last name. She smoked Marlboro cigarettes. She would be 55 years old today, having been 30 years old when she vanished. Moving on to the next case. Virginia Hannon. In 1984, Virginia Hannon, then 59 years old, resided in Boston, Massachusetts. She had worked as a lunch lady at an elementary school in the area before retiring and receiving a small inheritance from her family. Virginia, too, was a widow who lived by herself in her house. She was murdered on February 12, 1984, when someone broke into her home. On her bed, her body was discovered. It was unclear why what had occurred. The case was closed because investigators were unable to identify the person who had injured the woman. A guy came forward in 2020 with information that would ultimately lead to the case's resolution. He disclosed to the detectives that Jesse Elwood was a buddy of his. 2019 saw Jesse inform him that he had killed Virginia Hannon. He only notified investigators in 2020 because Jesse, who was 58 years old, had died the day before. A DNA sample was obtained by investigators from Jesse's corpse at the hospital where he had recently gone away. They discovered in 2021 that it matched DNA discovered on a number of objects from a crime scene. Jesse lived close to Virginia and did, it seems, have a criminal background, but detectives never investigated into him. During a press conference, District Attorney Tim Cruz stated that nobody in the room ever abandoned up on identifying the perpetrator of the horrible murder. We wouldn't know who did it if it weren't for her DNA. At the announcement, the majority of Virginia's family members were present, and they expressed gratitude that the day had finally arrived. Since nothing was taken, and it is thought that Jesse did not know Virginia, the reason behind his actions is still unknown. As Tim Cruz once stated, DNA connects us to the people, but it doesn't always connect us to the details of what happened. Richard Hannon, Virginia's nephew, described her as a wonderful woman. She was very giving, like the community, the area, and the locals. She was also very focused on her family. He continues to wish that additional information on Jesse would surface from someone who knew him. I think someone will remember. Someone will have the courage to speak up. Moving on to the next case. Raina Lynn Reeson. On May 6, 1976, Raina Lynn Reeson was born in Lockport, Indiana. She shared a home with Ben and Karen Reeson, her parents. Lori, her elder sister, and Wendy, her younger sister, were her sisters. Raina, then 16 years old, was regarded as an excellent student in 1993 and had a strong desire to become a veterinarian due to her great love for animals. In addition to being a sophomore at Lockport High School, Raina held 3 jobs. She cleaned kettles and walked dogs as part of her job at the animal hospital. After a brief shift from 4 to 6 p.m. on Friday, March 26, 1993, Raina was assigned to close the animal hospital. Raina was excited to meet her ex-boyfriend, Matt Elser, again, and they had planned to spend the evening together. The date was an attempt to maybe reunite after their recent breakup. Similar to Raina, Matt was thought of as a decent young man and came from a solid, exceptional family. He was, in short, the kind of guy that any father would be proud to introduce their daughter to. Matt picked up Raina from the animal hospital at 6 o'clock in the evening. After a while, he got out of his car and went to the front door, where he saw that the door was closed and all the lights were off. After noticing that Raina's car was missing from the parking lot, Matt decided to drive over to her house to check on her. Matt was informed by Ben, Raina's father, that she had not come home from work. She had left the house to work her shift at the animal hospital, and they hadn't seen her since. Her family was beginning to worry, even though they had assumed she was out on a date with Matt. Raina's decision to keep her location a secret from her family was atypical. Raina's parents, Wendy, her younger sister, and Matt were all inside the house waiting for her to return. Raina's family proceeded to the police station to report her missing when, at 10:30 p.m., she was still nowhere to be seen. A missing persons report could only be filed by the police after a 24-hour waiting period. Ben showed them a picture of Raina and advised them to keep an eye out because it was so different from her. That's when her family began to search for her. They made every effort to contact her friends, but none was aware of her whereabouts. They also distributed leaflets listing missing people to the neighborhood in the hopes that someone would come forward with important information. Following their involvement, the police issued a public request for any leads regarding Raina's location. Several witnesses reported right away that they had seen a sedan parked outside Raina's workplace, the veterinary hospital, shortly before 6 o'clock in the evening. Numerous witnesses reported seeing Raina and 2 men in the vehicle. Raina seemed to be having a disagreement with the males. At first, the witnesses disregarded it, thinking it was simply a couple arguing. Investigators questioned Matt Elser. He persisted in telling the tale of how he had been waiting for Raina and found out that she had left the animal hospital. It was revealed to the police that Matt had desired a separation from the relationship. They had separated, but they had lately reconciled. They were both looking forward to their date, which was meant to be incredibly spectacular. Matt was aware that Raina's absence indicated a dangerous situation. The authorities were reassured by Raina's parents that Matt was a decent and reliable young guy. They absolved him of any guilt by pointing out that the car witnesses observed was not his. The night after Raina vanished, her automobile was found not far from the animal hospital. She appeared to be having car difficulty because the hood of the car was lifted. Her keys were still in the ignition when the officers arrived, so it was easy for them to start her automobile. The car breakdown seems to have been faked. Officers also noticed that Raina's pocketbook and credit cards were still in her handbag, which was still in her car. This was clearly not a robbery because all of her money was still in the car. Inside Raina's glove compartment was a man's ring. Matt Elser was shown the item. Matt said that the ring wasn't his. He recognized the man's ring as Jason Tibbs's. Raina's previous boyfriend was Jason. After dating for around 8 months, which began in the 7th grade, they called it quits. He had left school early and had a criminal record. The police chose to speak with Jason Tibbs, a 16-year-old. He asked where the ring had been recovered after acknowledging that it was actually his. He said that they were still friends and that he had done some work on the automobile and must have forgotten his ring in the glove compartment when the authorities told him it had been found in Raina's car. Jason explained that he had removed his ring while working on the automobile in order to shield it from dirt and oil. Locals recommended Jason and stated he was a great mechanic. If Raina was experiencing car difficulty, it made sense that she would have gotten in touch with him. He was questioned by investigators about his whereabouts the night she vanished. Jason said he'd been having fun, like a fox hunting game. Played in cars, fox hunting is akin to hide and seek. Friends use wireless radios to communicate their whereabouts and attempt to track one another down. Although his buddies acknowledged that they had engaged in a game of fox hunting that night, nobody had truly seen Jason. The ring seemed to be a dead end, as Raina's father attested to Raina and Jason's friendship. The cops found a revelation that turned the case around on Raina. Deputy Matt's Letterman jacket was found in Lockport. It was the jacket that Raina was last seen wearing. Raina received it from Matt to wear. That meant the two of them were together. The location of the jacket and her car were separated by around 6 or 7 miles. After the first search by the police, the jacket had been placed there. Sadly, the jacket didn't turn up any more information. A fisherman and his teenage daughter were at a pond off Range Road, north of Lockport, Indiana, on April 26, 1993, 1 month after Raina was last seen. While strolling, the daughter noticed 2 human legs submerged in the river. She called out to her dad to come look. As he approached, he could see that the body in the water belonged to a woman. Her body was supported by 2 logs. The exact clothes that Raina was last seen wearing before she vanished were being worn by the unidentified woman when police got on the location. They noticed. She was identified as Raina Ryson, despite the body's advanced condition of decomposition. The case of the missing person was over. Her body had no visible wounds or indications of severe trauma. Raina had been strangled. It was determined later on at the autopsy. Following the discovery, detectives checked up with Jason Tibbs to see if he had any further information. He gave them the Ray McCarty story. Ray was wed to Lori Risen, Raina's elder sister. When Raina was 11 years old, Ray had raped and pregnant her. As a result, Ray had served time in jail. His probation expired just 2 months prior to Raina's disappearance. Ray did what you'd assume would have led Lori Reeson to file for divorce, but she didn't. They remained wed. He was dangerous and obviously motivated, having committed crimes in the past specifically targeting Raina. Ray and Lori's home was visited by investigators. Raina vanished on the day when the couple claimed they hadn't seen her. Ray claimed that evening he was occupied with shooting pigeons on a friend's farm. When the detectives contacted a friend, he was able to corroborate that Ray was with him that evening. Investigators felt something wasn't quite right, so they proceeded to speak with Ray once again. In a private conversation, Ray revealed to them that he had seen Raina the night before she disappeared. On March 26, 1993, he informed them that he was house searching. It was around 5:40 p.m. when he noticed the animal hospital through the window of the residence. He said that he had only seen Raina for a short while in the animal hospital's parking lot, and he asked her if she knew where Lori was. After that, he departed and that evening picked up a female hitchhiker. Ray said that his first reluctance to acknowledge seeing her was due to the hitchhiker. His treatment of her sister had made her hesitant to truly trust him. At this point, Ray McCarty emerged as the primary suspect, but the case was abandoned since there was insufficient tangible evidence linking him to the crime. Regretfully, the case was unsolved for nearly 18 months. At that moment, Larry Hall's van was pulled over by Indiana State Police. Hall would traverse the Midwest to witness reenactments of the American Civil War and the American Revolution. His van looked like one from an abduction attempt. When the police searched the van, they found a number of things connected to Raina's case. He carried Raina newspaper cuttings and a medicine bottle labeled Arisen in his van. Larry asserted that he killed and kidnapped Rana, and he was taken into custody. After looking into his whereabouts on the night she vanished, detectives learned that he was in Kentucky and that the prescription bottle wasn't real. Hall had made up a confession that he had kidnapped and killed about 50 additional women. He gave off the impression of being the kind of guy who would walk right into any inquiry and make himself known. Later on, Raina's case eliminated Larry Hall as a suspect, but he was not entirely innocent. He was convicted of killing Jessica Roche, a 15-year-old. For those who are interested, I will briefly discuss the case at the conclusion of the video. In Raina's instance, nothing happened until 1998. The investigators turned back to Matt Elser, Jason Tibbs, and Ray McCarty, their original suspects, as they had run out of options. Because of his strong alibi, Matt was never taken seriously as a suspect by the police. Although there was no evidence to support Jason's claim that he had gone fox hunting, it appeared that he had a strong relationship with Raina. However, Ray was a terrible man and had first lied about his alibi, so the investigators chose to concentrate their efforts on him. They obtained a warrant to examine Ray's belongings. Investigators discovered 2 firearms and a stun gun inside his home. They also found blood in the trunk of his car. However, they couldn't figure out where it came from. May 1998 saw the arrest of Ray McCarty. He spent 15 months in jail as the authorities worked to strengthen their case against him. There had been a new prosecutor assigned while Ray was incarcerated. It was determined that the blood belonged to a deer because he was a hunter. They were compelled to release him once more because the prosecution believed there was insufficient evidence to connect him to the crime. After serving a year in jail, he was freed. Regretfully, the matter would remain a cold case for another 9 years. Then in 2008, authorities received a lead that would completely unravel this case. One of the 44-year-old prisoners wrote them a letter. Ricky Hammonds is his name. He asked to speak with the detectives. Ricky was incarcerated due to the fact that he killed his roommate. Ricky stated that he considered his niece before deciding to speak up. If something had happened to her, he said he would want someone to come forward. That was all he had to say. When he was 14 years old in 1993, he was using marijuana on the roof of a barn close to his parents' home. In the barn, he heard a car drive by. Ricky noticed Jason Tibbs and Eric Feldman, the boyfriend of his sister. When they opened the automobile belonging to his sister, Ricky saw a body wrapped in a blanket. Ricky was still able to identify the victim's upper body. The person was a woman dressed in a Leatherman jacket. When Raina's face surfaced in the public a few days later, he discovered who it was. He had no idea it was Raina. Ricky claimed that he was afraid of getting in trouble for smoking marijuana back in 1993, which is why he was afraid to come forward. Eric Fieldman was located by the police in South Carolina. He was clearly anxious. He declined all interviews and did not want to talk to them. The investigators then assured him that if he could tell them precisely what had happened with Raina, he would not be held accountable. After agreeing to the terms, he told them everything. On March 26, 1993, Eric claimed that he and Jason were driving past the animal hospital in his girlfriend's vehicle. Jason wished that Raina would take Matt back and go. He beckoned her over to the automobile as soon as she got out of the animal hospital. It was obvious she didn't want to speak with him. He shoved her into the car before she could scream, then commanded Eric to speed away. After a few minutes, Raina attempted to flee as Eric pulled over. Jason trailed behind her and remarked, "No one can have you if I can." After that, he choked her until her breathing ceased. After loading Raina's body into the trunk, Jason and Eric headed to the barn. That's how Ricky first noticed them. Eric and Jason then made the difficult decision to bury Raina's body in the pond and use logs to weigh her down. Eric took Jason back to the clinic so he could retrieve Raina's vehicle. Jason left the automobile behind. He threw Matt's jacket out too. Jason Tibbs, 38, was detained and accused with killing Raina Reeson in August 2013. It had been 20 years since Raina's death. Late in 2013, his trial got underway. Because Ricky was a high school student at the time and took 15 years to come out with the facts, his defense contended Ricky was not a reliable witness. Eric Freeman was given immunity from prosecution so that he could testify honestly during the trial. Following a protracted trial that concluded in December 2014, Jason Tibbs was declared guilty. He served 20 of the 40 years he was condemned to, Raina's family sobbed outside the courthouse. They gave the prosecutor and each other hugs. Although the recent family received some justice, their daughter, who was lost in an act of passion, would never return. Tibbs continues to maintain his innocence and blame Ray McCarty for Raina's ordeal. After being rejected by the state's appellate court, Tibbs filed multiple appeals with the Indiana Supreme Court. Jason Tibbs requested a new trial, but on September 8, 2016, the Indiana Court of Appeals denied his request. His attorneys have publicly declared that they are still pursuing his innocence as recently as 2018. At 16 years old, Raina still had her entire life ahead of her. When she and Matt reconciled, she was at last content once more. Regretfully, it appears that she was surrounded by untrustworthy individuals that disappointed her. I'll go into some of the specifics of Jessica Roche's case as promised. In 1993, Jessica, at 15 years old, resided in Georgetown, Illinois. She envisioned herself as a pilot in the future. Jessica Roche went outside to ride her new bicycle on September 20th, 1993. Tragic events occurred when Jessica's sister discovered the bike abandoned on the street, but Jessica was missing. Although Jessica's sister warned their father, who then called the police, Jessica was never seen alive again. Her remains were found in Perrysville, Indiana, near the state line, 6 weeks after she went missing. It was while operating his combine that a farmer discovered her body. Jessica seemed like she had been there for a while. It was challenging for investigators to determine more about when, how, or where she died because of the condition of her remains. About a year later, when suspect Larry Hall started pursuing two girls, police located him. The girls gave investigators Hall's license plate number and reported him to the police. Hall reportedly winced, covered his face, and then denied ever having seen Jessica when he was taken up for interrogation by the police. Eventually, a confession did surface, with Hall informing authorities that he had tied her up but couldn't recall the tool he had used. Then he claimed to have undressed her, attacked her, and used his belt to strangle her against a tree. Hall also gave hazy accounts of the other young females he had mistreated. He told the authorities, "I picked up several girls in other areas, but I can't remember which ones I heard." Investigators found that although he was making up his confessions to several crimes, he really killed Jessica. All received a life sentence without the chance of release. Right now, he's a prisoner in a medium security facility in North Carolina. The people close to Jessica Roche organized events in her honor in the past, and in 2015, they established a scholarship in her honor. Moving on to the next case. Sherry Rasmussen, February 24th, 1986. The 29-year-old Sherry Rasmussen is found dead on the ground, horribly injured, and covered in scars by the Los Angeles Police Department. The scene inside the house was disorganized. A broken china vase testified to the violence committed upon Sherry, while audio equipment was torn from the walls and furniture was thrown around. Everything suggests the same hypothesis to detectives, a robbery gone deadly. However, the autopsy reports, which presented a different picture, revealed a truth that lay under the surface. They noticed a bite mark on Sherry's left arm, which looked weird. What precisely transpired with Sherry? Was her terrible demise really the result of a robbery or act of retaliation? Sherry met a man named John Rutin in May 1984. They immediately hit it off and started dating. When they made the decision to get married a year later, John moved into Sherry's flat. February 24th, 1986. John moved out of their Balboa Boulevard condo to start his new life. Sherry had an inspirational speech to deliver at work that day. Approximately 9:45 a.m., a nearby resident saw something strange. The automobile wasn't there, but John's garage door was open. This was strange because John had always made sure all the doors were closed before leaving. John called home after around 15 minutes, but nobody answered. He dismissed it, supposing Sherry might have gone to work. However, his calls stayed unanswered throughout the day. John began to have doubts. But John's anxiety gauge went up when he checked in with Sherry's secretary and found out she hadn't arrived at work. Teresa Lane, Sherry's sister, also contacted her at around 10 in the morning. A maid cleaning an adjacent flat heard what sounded like a heated dispute, followed by a loud thump around 12:30 p.m., which put a twist in the story. John knew something wasn't right when he got home from work at 6 o'clock. Normally closed, the garage door was lopsided, and there was no sign of Sherry's BMW, which he had bought her as a proposal gift. It was strange that Sherry would have departed without notifying him, given her former arrangements. John saw broken glass fragments lying around as he approached the garage and knew right away where they had come from. There was a little balcony with a broken glass door over the garage. Through the garage, John entered the house. Sherry was lying there, terribly damaged, her body spread on the floor. She had scrapes and bruises all over her body, including on her head and neck, and her eyes were puffy. She had been lying there for some time, and her body was cold and stiff when John discovered her. Sadly, John tried to resuscitate her and frantically felt for a pulse, but there was none. He called 911 in a panic, and the police and paramedics arrived on the scene shortly after. There was complete mayhem in every room as the cops searched the crime scene. It was evident that there had been a fierce conflict since furniture was thrown around. A cracked porcelain vase gave away how serious Sherry's attack was. They found a bloody handprint close to the alarm system the couple had just installed, which added to the unsettling image. From the look of things, Sherry had tried desperately to set off the alarm to alert someone to her need for assistance. Unfortunately, though, she was unable to get there in time. It was obvious that there had been a fierce conflict inside the house, particularly in the living room. Tall stereo speakers were discovered by the investigators. One had been torn from the wall and dumped on the ground close to Sherry's corpse. They gathered more evidence from Sherry's body in the area as they carried out their investigation. In addition to using an assault kit to collect swabs from the bite marks they discovered on Sherry's arms, they searched the residence for fingerprints. Abrasions on Sherry's wrists, which pointed to the possibility that she had been restrained by a rope or cord, were also discovered by the investigators close to the front door. She had obviously battled so fiercely that the struggle snapped off her fingernails. The discovery that she had been shot 3 times in the chest added to the horror. They came to the startling conclusion that in spite of all her numerous injuries, it was the gunshots that eventually claimed her life. 2 bullets were discovered within Sherry, while one had exited her body through an incision on her back. It was evident that the .38 caliber handgun used to shoot them was discharged at a very close range. Investigators discovered a vibrantly quilted blanket on a living room chair, which furthered the mystery. It appeared to have been used to conceal the sound of the gunshots because it had 2 holes in the powder burns. With all of this evidence, the police were able to quickly determine that this was not your typical crime. It was a badly executed heist gone horribly wrong. The police reported that Sherry was not expecting any crooks to break into her flat, but it appeared that at least 2 of them did. They so engaged in a bloody combat, which Sherry valiantly carried out to the very end. A number of hints suggested that this was a botched heist. Sherry's automobile was first stolen from the garage, which suggested that the thief intended to take. Second, a player and stereo equipment were discovered close to the stairs, indicating that the robbers intended to take them before the altercation. But during the altercation, things took a fatal turn, resulting in Sherry's terrible death. But there were problems with this heist theory. First, no evidence of forced entry was discovered by the police. This implied that Sherry had either given them the key to her flat or allowed the crooks entry. Second, the fact that every precious item, including a jewelry box, was unharmed cast doubt on the purpose of the break-in. Detectives interviewed every neighbor who lived near Sherry, but they were unable to find anything. Although a few neighbors claimed to have heard gunshots or witnessed someone entering Sherry's flat, others only heard the sounds of a struggle. In an effort to uncover information that would help solve the case, experts also took fingerprints and blood samples from the residence. But in the 1980s, DNA analysis was not yet feasible. The lead investigator thought of a way to get more evidence. Taking a piece of cotton, he dabbed at the bite mark that was discovered on Sherry's torso. If the assailant had left behind saliva, perhaps it would provide a crucial hint that would lead to the murderer's capture. Following a thorough check of the residence, investigators discovered a fascinating fact. The marriage license between Sherry and John was the only item that the robbers had stolen. Given that John was the one closest to Sherry and may have had easy access to the flat, this aroused questions and suspicions. Nevertheless, John's strong alibi and lack of a clear motive meant that he was soon discarded as a suspect in the death of his wife. To further cleanse his name, it was he who reported the missing certificate to the police. Detectives at the scene were baffled as to why the robbers had only taken Sherry and John's marriage license. Remaining steadfast in their notion of robbery, they concentrated on identifying the culprits. They found it after a week and a half of looking. 4 kilometers from Sherry's apartment, in a parking area, was where her automobile was recovered. In some cases, 2 robbers would enter apartments via the garage while pointing weapons and taking audio equipment. The main detective thought Sherry's murder might have been committed by the same people. They graded crude sketches of the suspects and attempted to locate them through witness statements. They discovered that the 2 men were Latinos as well. The suspects were never located. Nevertheless, in spite of their best attempts, Sherry's parents were dissatisfied with the lack of advancement and believed that insufficient efforts were being made by investigators to determine the cause of their daughter's untimely demise. Sherry's father, Nels Rasmussen, wasn't persuaded by the police's burglary scenario. He was a frequent visitor to the police station, encouraging the investigators to look into alternative options. It was difficult for him to accept that Sherry, who was tall, robust, and in excellent physical condition, could have been overcome in a poorly executed break-in. Nels pushed for a more extensive investigation into the matter because he was adamant about finding out the truth about what had actually happened to his daughter. Though Nels was unaware of the identity of John's ex-girlfriend because Sherry had never brought it up, he asked the police to investigate. Sherry did, however, confide in her father about the disturbing vibes she was getting from the unannounced visits from the ex-girlfriend. However, who was this enigmatic woman, and what was her relationship to John? Stephanie Lazarus, by the way, wasn't just any old ex-girlfriend. Rather, she was an LAPD cop. Stephanie fell hard for John right away, but he didn't realize she was interested in him romantically. He had no idea that she had feelings for him beyond that of a good friend. John believed everyone could see that their relationship was little more than friendship sporadically tinged with sexual closeness. He never felt the need to ask Stephanie about her thoughts or to communicate his own because of this. However, Stephanie knew all too well that John had no love feelings for her. Therefore, Stephanie was devastated to learn on June 4th, 1985, that John and Sherry were engaged. When Stephanie called John that evening, her voice was shaking as she begged, "I must see you immediately. Please make yourself known." John agreed out of concern and rushed over to Stephanie's place. She was still crying when he got there, which really alarmed him. He had known Stephanie for 7 years, but he had never seen her this unhappy. He attempted to comfort her, but before he could speak, Stephanie broke down in tears and declared her love for him. "I told you I loved you. I have always adored you. I was just unable to watch you get married to someone else." Although John was surprised by Stephanie's admission, he was sure that their relationship had always been unambiguous. He softly told her that he was genuinely in love with Sherry and that they didn't feel the same way. Stephanie persevered and begged John one last time to sleep with her, but he refused. John grudgingly agreed, feeling bad for Stephanie, but he made it plain that this would be their last time together and that they would not be able to see each other again. Sherry was unaware of John and Stephanie's complex connection at this moment. She had no idea that Stephanie had more unexpected plans in her sleeve that would soon throw their lives for a loop. Stephanie paid Sherry a surprise visit at the Glendale Adventist Medical Center in August of 1985. Stephanie went to have a private discussion with Sherry in her office. After shutting the door, they talked for a short while. After Stephanie finally departed, Sherry came out of her office with tears in her eyes and a clearly troubled appearance. Everyone could see that Sherry was really upset about something. Sherry contacted her father Nels that evening and told him about the uncomfortable experience she had with Stephanie. She revealed the unsettling letter she got, but she refrained from revealing Stephanie's identity. John was unable to be with anybody else if he couldn't be with Stephanie. However, Stephanie's invasive actions didn't stop there. She went to Sherry's place on her second visit and requested John to wax her skis. John followed Stephanie's instructions in spite of Sherry's protests. Sherry thought her behavior was strange, especially because she was sporting attractive exercise gear. Sherry addressed John after Stephanie departed, asking him whether their romance was really gone. John told her that Stephanie and he were simply friends. But a few days later, Stephanie came back to get her skis, this time armed and wearing her police uniform. Sherry begged John to stop Stephanie's frequent visits as she became more and more agitated. But John brushed off her worries, telling her that their relationship was over and told her to ignore Stephanie's behavior. However, Sherry was unable to get rid of her persistent doubts regarding Stephanie's enigmatic appearances and her ability to get past the security systems of their apartment building. Sherry once noticed a hooded stranger watching at them in a restaurant when she was eating with John. As soon as she turned to look back, the enigmatic figure vanished. He was hiding his face, so Sherry couldn't tell who he was. Sherry's father was so anxious for answers that he told the investigators about these unpleasant experiences, hoping they would listen to him. But their lack of concern only made the family's anger and worry worse. Investigators were positive that the two males who had broken into an apartment close to Sherry's house were responsible for the murder. But 3 months after the terrible catastrophe, an odd development happened. A number of important case files related to Sherry's disappeared from the police station inexplicably. These contained the detectives' thorough documents that tracked the development of the ongoing inquiry, but they were mysteriously missing. Serious doubts were raised by its absence. Was this a true accident, or had these materials been deleted from the case files on purpose? Given that an LAPD officer was involved in the case, the victim's relatives suspected foul play, but no meaningful leads materialized, and the matter went unresolved for years. When lead investigator Mayer departed 7 years later, Sherry's father took the chance to speak with his replacement in the hopes of a more dedicated handling of the case. Sherry's father even offered to pay for the investigator to perform a DNA study at her request. But the detective brushed it off, saying there was no point comparing the DNA profile to the absence of a suspect. The detective, who was still of the opinion that Sherry's case involved only a poorly executed heist, asked him to go on. John, meanwhile, formed a new family and moved on with his life. But then strange things started to happen. He got in touch with Stephanie again, and they decided to go to Hawaii together. Nevertheless, something unexpected happened right before their journey. John called the police directly to find out whether there was any fresh information connecting Stephanie to Sherry's death. It came out that John was adamant about getting justice for Sherry and suspected Stephanie of being involved in her murder. But despite continuing his close friendship with Stephanie, he kept this suspicion to himself for years and was reluctant to discuss it. 3 years later, she moved to Simi Valley with her partner, a fellow officer, and they adopted a daughter. Stephanie kept up their relationship, meeting John on a regular basis despite her flawless reputation. It appeared as though Sherry's murder would go unsolved forever as time went on. But in 2001, there was a ray of optimism when a dedicated Los Angeles cold case team was formed to address unsolved homicides. This unit's detectives were given Sherry's case, along with thousands more. The cotton piece that might have held the attacker's saliva after they bit someone during the assault was one piece of evidence. Detectives took up Sherry's case again 2 years later, in 2003, and sent all of the evidence they had for DNA testing to a lab. But Jennifer Francis, a lab technician, didn't start working on it until December 2003. They had to wait almost 2 years for the results because of a backlog of cases. When Jennifer finally examined the blood samples from the apartment and the fingernail clippings in January 2005, she found that Sherry was the only person whose DNA was present. All that was left to do was examine the leftover sample taken from Sherry's bite mark. Still, there remained an issue. For a whole day, no one could find the vial containing the sample. It was found next to a large refrigerator's wall after a thorough search. It seemed as though an attempt had been made to eliminate any evidence connected to the murderer. Fortunately, this important detail had been missed. Frances examined the sample and found that the DNA belonged to an unknown woman. She hurriedly compared it to the FBI database, but was shocked to find that there were no matches. After learning that the DNA matched to a woman, she looked into it further and discovered information regarding a third-party female who was allegedly harassing the deceased prior to her death, both at home and at work. Curious about the probable connection, Frances questioned the supervising detective if they had looked into this woman before. She was taken aback by his answer. "Oh, you mean the LAPD detective?" He continued by saying that the woman in question was the victim's husband's previous girlfriend who was working as an LAPD detective at the time. But he cut off any connection right once, saying emphatically, "She's not involved in this." They did not consider any other options, and the case became cold again as they ran into a dead end in their hunt for fresh leads. Sherry's case presented a number of difficulties, with progress frequently coming to a standstill. But in February 2009, a new chance presented itself when Jim Nuttall and Pete Barbera took up the manhunts probe. They went over the materials that earlier researchers had left carefully. They discarded the burglary scenario after discovering that the DNA evidence pointed to a female suspect, and they understood they would have to start over from scratch. Rather than seeing it as a straightforward burglary, Nuttall and Barba suspected murder. They thought the burglary was staged to hide the true intention. The crime scene didn't match the description of a regular break-in, especially because it occurred during the day. Sherry's jewelry box sat unopened on her dresser, a clear target for thieves. They therefore made the decision to compile a list of all the ladies who might be connected to Sherry's slaying. Following some research, they had 5 names: Stephanie, 3 other young women, and one of Sherry's co-workers. When John revealed over the phone that Stephanie was a police officer, Nuttall was taken aback. Stephanie was a detective in the Commercial Crimes Division at the time, having been promoted to a higher position. She was handling cases involving art theft. They quickly eliminated the 3 ladies from the list with the help of other investigators, since they had strong alibis and no ulterior intentions. They then focused on the nurse who was employed by Sherry. Given the information in the case file about their strained relationship, the police took a covert sample of her DNA from the garbage she had thrown out. When the profile taken from the sample was evaluated by experts, they discovered that it didn't match the saliva that was discovered at the bite site. As a result, Stephanie Lazarus was the only suspect the detectives had left. But in the course of this investigation, the detectives and their colleagues agreed to withhold this knowledge until they could obtain hard proof against Stephanie or exclude her involvement. They wanted to avoid her building a solid defense if she was, in fact, the murderer, so they kept it quiet. The fact that Stephanie worked in the same building and on the same floor as them was curiously fortuitous. They took many steps to keep everything secret, including not writing her name in the notes. Rather, Stephanie was addressed as just number 5. As they dug further into Stephanie's life in the middle of the 1980s, they made their first fascinating discovery. Stephanie had a Smith & Wesson kind .4,938 caliber revolver at the time of the murder, the same kind that Sherry was shot with. Investigators also found that Sherry had complained about Stephanie's strange and occasionally hostile behavior on multiple occasions. When they discovered that Stephanie had repeatedly broken into Sherry's apartment in the gated neighborhood, the narrative intensified. In a devastating discovery, the investigators learned that Stephanie had submitted an odd report at the police station 2 weeks before to the murder. She said that a .38 caliber revolver was taken from her car, which was parked close to the dock during a break-in. Investigators were taken aback by this discovery, particularly in light of the circumstances surrounding Sherry's murder. That Stephanie would opportunistically claim the theft of a weapon that was identical to the one used in the incident seemed extremely suspicious. The detectives didn't take long to alert their superiors once Stephanie turned out to be the main suspect. They came up with a scheme to stealthily gather a DNA sample for her, choosing to discard it voluntarily so as not to reveal the nature of the research to her. Undercover agents watched Stephanie's every move for a full week, waiting for the right opportunity. Finally, on May 28, 2009, their opportunity presented itself. For a quick snack, Stephanie stopped by a cafe with her stepdaughter. The moment they stepped outside, the police moved quickly to seize the glass that Stephanie had taken a sip from. They immediately sent it to the lab for analysis in the hopes that it might finally provide a breakthrough in the case. The results were given by the lab the next day, and they were shocking. The DNA from Sherry's body discovered near the bite mark exactly matched the DNA from Stephanie's glass. It validated the police's long-held suspicion that Stephanie was Sherry's murderer. The shocking prospect that Stephanie was responsible for the removal of important documents from the initial investigation and for erasing any evidence of her involvement was revealed by this discovery. But there was no denying the indisputable DNA evidence. Not having much time to think things through, the investigators quickly turned their attention to creating a strategy for Stephanie's arrest. Even though it appeared risky to face Stephanie when she was with her husband and stepdaughter, the investigators considered the possibility of arresting Stephanie at home. Rather than that, they discussed ways to force someone of Stephanie's status to give up their weapon. They eventually came up with an excellent fix. Holding cells for the short-term custody of criminals were located in the police department basement. Entry required the surrender of a weapon. This brilliant scheme offered the ideal means of apprehending Stephanie without raising any issues with her family's involvement. It's time to entice Stephanie to the cells in the basement. The detectives came up with a cunning scheme. Two investigators approached her on June 5th, 2009, carrying covert microphones. They informed her that they had detained a person who may have information about paintings that had been stolen. They looked to Stephanie for her knowledge because she had dealt with art thefts before. Stephanie went along to the basement where the culprit was allegedly being detained after voluntarily offering to help the investigators. The first element of the plan came together as she gave up her firearm. Stephanie was surprised to find herself in the interrogation room now. Rather than come up with a suspect, the detectives slowly and methodically started to disclose their cards one by one. To elicit more information from Stephanie about her prior experiences, the investigators started by gently probing her memory. When Stephanie revealed her relationship with John, the topic inevitably turned to Sherry. Inquiring into the oddities of their interactions, including the unannounced visits and circumstances that might have connected Stephanie to the murder, they asked her to recollect her memories of Sherry. When asked about Sherry during the interview, Stephanie seemed more uncomfortable and defensive and made an effort to disavow any memory of their previous exchanges. Stephanie tried to duck and dodge, but she unintentionally gave away enough about their past. It was now her turn to hear the truth from the detectives. Stephanie was given permission to leave following the interrogation. However, as she got to the end of the hallway, a number of police officers were waiting for her, handcuffed. Stephanie's eventual arrest marked a dramatic occasion 23 years after the crime. She firmly denied any involvement and insisted on her innocence even during the official interrogation, exercising her right to silence. The detectives were forced to get the paperwork ready for her transport to court because she was not going to confess. After being incarcerated for a few years, Stephanie appeared in court for the first time in 2012. The defense cast doubt on the results of the DNA test and emphasized that Stephanie had not been the subject of any earlier accusations during the trial. Nevertheless, the court was not persuaded by these reasons. The prosecution laid forth their argument, claiming that Stephanie had entered Sherry's apartment on the day of the murder after waiting for John to depart for work. She confronted Sherry once inside, which caused the fight to spill downstairs. Finally, Stephanie broke a vase over Sherry's head to render her unconscious before shooting and killing her. She then set up a fictitious burglary scene in order to hide her tracks, and she departed the scene after obtaining their marriage license. They found a journal in her home from the middle of the 1980s, which was full of notes about her love for John and her frustration with his relationship with Sherry. But there was no talk about her gun being taken. Her computer history also showed that she had searched for John's name several times in the late 1990s. These results strengthened the prosecution's case by illuminating Stephanie's fixation on John and her possible motivations for the crime. Stephanie's fate was sealed on March 8, 2012, when the jury found her guilty of murder. The judge's sentencing of 27 years to life in prison, plus an extra 2 years for wielding a service weapon, caused the courtroom to fall silent. John had moved on with his life, and Stephanie was at last behind bars. The idea that she killed Sherry and destroyed 3 lives in the process is heartbreaking. But for what purpose? Stephanie ultimately failed in her attempts to win John's love, and she is now also miserable. Sherry's story might have remained hidden in old archives if it weren't for the committed investigators who took up the case. But justice was eventually done because of their knowledge and the strength of DNA evidence. With the knowledge that the person who had stolen their daughter was in prison, Sherry's parents were at last able to find comfort. Moving on to the next case. Krishana Logan. Police responded to a suspicious complaint on April 15, 2000, and raced to Robbinswood Avenue in Toledo, Ohio. They discovered Krishana Logan, then 19 years old, dead and abandoned. She had obviously been suffocated and beaten. At first, it looked like the police had a good lead and the inquiry would be finished quickly. However, as fate would have it, there would be no closure to the case for a very long time. There was finally a breakthrough after over 20 years of unanswered questions and unsolved anguish, but it came in a way that surprised everyone. Who then committed this horrific act, and what turn of events brought them to face justice in the end? Krishana Logan, then 19 years old, was employed as an exotic dancer at Platinum Showgirls, a club in Toledo, Ohio, where she went by the stage name Vegas. Chris Hanna was really excited about moving to Texas to further her schooling. Sadly, though, her dreams would never come true. Most nights, Chris Hanna worked at the club, but on April 14, 2000, she took the night off and did not report to work. On April 15th, just before daybreak, her body was discovered in her flat. Theodora Wilson, Krishana's landlord and next-door neighbor, found her body. Theodora went to check up on Chris Hanna because she had heard some noises coming from her flat throughout the night. She was shocked to discover Chris Hanna in the living room, strangled and battered. Michael Mugler, a police officer from Toledo, and his partner were sent to the Robbinswood address to help the fire department with their response. Their main responsibility was to keep the area secure while keeping track of everyone who entered, left, and why. The car belonging to Chris Hanna was towed as proof. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free. Now, let's move on with the video. While doing so, Mugler came across a man who introduced himself as Ezel Brown, also known as Zeke, the boyfriend of Chris Hanna Logan, who was strolling down the driveway. He said he wanted to know what was going on. The on-call Toledo police investigator, Detective Terry Cusino, was in charge of taking pictures and recording footage of the crime scene. Even after a careful inspection, no fingerprints that could be used were found. But tangible proof was gathered in the form of several items, such as Krishana's knickers around her right ankle, a black bra around her body, and a flowery dress covering her head. Krishana's autopsy was performed by Deputy Coroner Cynthia Bessier of Lucas County. She provided testimony regarding the interior and exterior injuries to Krishana's neck. Bessier said that Chris Hanna had little alcohol and no illegal substances in her blood, and she took samples from several parts of her body for DNA testing, all of which were corroborated by photos showing the bruises. Bessier declared Krishana's death to be a homicide after determining that she had been strangled. The autopsy report was included in the evidence package. Because there was no evidence of forced entry at the crime site, authorities initially thought she had been slain by a familiar person. As the investigation went on, one of Krishana's high school friends, whose identity remained undisclosed, spoke about her poisonous relationship with her ex-boyfriend, Brown, which was characterized by disputes and fighting, and that Chris Hanna had been trying to stop. Brown stalked Chris Hanna even after she temporarily moved out. She disclosed that Christiana occasionally received presents and cash from Brown, frequently in exchange for personal services. Furthermore, Christiana would sometimes have intimate connections with the people she worked with at the club. However, Christiana always made sure her companion was aware of her whereabouts when she did this. The acquaintance revealed information about what happened the night before the murder. She and Christiana had met at Christiana's flat on Robbinswood Avenue in central Toledo on August 14, 2000, at about 12 o'clock in the evening. To show off Krishana's new Jeep, they drove off. They later made a visit at Krishana's mother's house and said hello to a neighbor. Around 7 o'clock at night, they departed to make preparations for the evening at Krishana's flat and stopped at a few hangouts. Afterwards, they went to a party at the home of Krishana's male neighbor, when it was observed that the two were kissing. They then went to 3 clubs after hours before going back to Krishana's flat at 4 in the morning. The neighbor said that early on April 15, 2000, he had been having sexual relations with Christiana Logan in his room. Despite their past personal relationship, it was strictly platonic and lacked any romantic overtones. He claimed he couldn't remember Christiana's previous relationships, but she was seeing a man from Detroit. Christiana's landlord, Theodora Wilson, gave testimony that matched the details given by her neighbor and friend on the day of the murder. Wilson also remembered seeing a big black man early on April 15, 2000, outside Christiana's flat who looked like Brown. Later, she heard loud music coming from a neighboring automobile, and she saw Christiana and the man walking into her flat. Wilson reported the disturbance to 911, attributing it to Krishana's apartment's furniture being relocated. Since Brown, Krishana's ex-boyfriend, was the only person who could have been connected, Brown was detained as the main suspect in the case. He continued to insist on his innocence, though, in 7 months later DNA evidence proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that he had nothing to do with Krishana's murder. However, the larger pattern that was developing went unnoticed by the investigators at the same time. With Krishana's case, 3 victims in a row were brought under the attention of a persistent criminal. A late teenage girl, whose name has been withheld to preserve her privacy, was walking home in South Toledo at 5:30 p.m. in late August of 2000. She had no idea that her stroll in the evening would become a nightmare. Abruptly, she was taken off the street and taken to a remote location by an unidentified attacker. She was beaten, and it was a terrifying experience. Not too many weeks later, in early October, a little girl, whose name was also kept secret, met a similar end while traveling to school. Similar to the previous victim, she was brutally attacked physically after being forcibly taken by the offender. Residents of the town were terrified as a result of these episodes, and law enforcement officials were left searching for explanations. The incident's evident similarities led investigators to delve more into the relationships between them. They uncovered an important finding while doing their inquiry. The DNA found in the bodies of Chris Hanna and the 2 victims belonged to the same person. But at the time, there were no known culprits in the database that the DNA profile matched. Authorities continued to pursue the offender with greater vigor. Using the recently discovered DNA evidence, they went over the victims' testimonies again in an attempt to extract any further information that would help identify the culprit. A thorough sketch was created as a result of these interviews. The suspect was characterized as a man African with light to medium skin tone who was possibly in his early 40s at the time of the incidents, based on the victims' accounts. He was about 5 feet 7 in height, with a unique mustache and possibly a shaved or bald head. The attacker's huge, bulging stomach was one noticeable trait that both victims noticed. The individual also gave out a distinct beer and cigarette smell, which could indicate certain lifestyle choices. His overall disheveled appearance along with any scars or blotchy coloring on his face, added to his description. Even while the specifics were still unknown, one victim even mentioned that he might have had a tattoo on his upper left arm. Significantly, both girls attested that the offender was not circumcised, offering a distinct identity that would facilitate his capture. Evelyn Logan, Krishana's mother, made an impassioned plea to anyone who could assist in solving these three heinous crimes as soon as these links were made public. However, the identity of the criminal remained elusive and the case stayed cold for years, despite the cooperative efforts of law enforcement authorities and the community's vigilance. The investigation was not given fresh life until 2013, when there was a renewed effort to solve the unsolved case. Thanks to developments in forensic technology and an unwavering dedication to justice, authorities kept looking for leads and looking into ways to bring the case to a close. And at last, a breakthrough happened in 2021, nearly 2 decades later. The culprit's DNA profile yielded a hit in the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, despite never matching any criminal database. The identification of Kenneth Marshall, 54, a resident of Hammond, Indiana, was made possible by the much-anticipated breakthrough. Following the link, Marshall was charged with abusing his girlfriend in Lake County, Indiana, but the arrest was unrelated. Following his arrest on November 18, 2021, for this assault, Marshall's DNA was gathered and uploaded to CODIS. From there, it was found to match 3 unsolved crimes from 2000, including Krishana's murder. With assistance from the U.S. Marshals Great Lakes Task Force, Marshall was taken into custody by Hammond Police on January 15, 2021, outside his residence on the 900 block of State Street in Hammond, Indiana. With Kenneth Marshall's conviction, a 2-decade horror and violence saga that plagued the lives of many victims came to a conclusion. A jury found Marshall guilty on August 16, 2022, of 5 charges of assault, felonious assault, murder, and aggravated murder. Lucas County Common Pleas Judge Stacy Cook harshly criticized Marshall's actions during his sentence hearing. She underlined how predatory Marshall's crimes were, pointing out that he preyed on weak people in order to satisfy his own desires. Judge Cook made sure that Marshall would be held accountable for his horrible deeds, even in the face of his defense, who claimed that the statute of limitations had run out on some accusations. Marshall's punishment was harsh in proportion to the seriousness of his crimes. Judge Cook sentenced him to consecutive terms for the assault offenses, as well as a life sentence in prison with the possibility of parole. Marshall would therefore only be qualified for parole following his 130-year prison sentence. Marshall's crime had an effect outside of the courtroom as well. The adult survivors testified against him with courage, sharing the anguish they had experienced. The testimony of these individuals was essential in obtaining Marshall's guilt and punishment. Krishana's family have suffered the anguish of living without closure for more than 5 years. They had been burdened by the unsolved questions surrounding her murder. We hope the quest of truth and the knowledge that Marshall will spend the rest of his life behind bars brings some comfort to Christiana's family as the wheels of justice turn and he faces the consequences of his crimes. Moving on to the next case. Tony Garcia. 2 newspaper delivery boys in Camarillo, California, which is roughly 50 miles from Los Angeles, made a terrifying discovery on January 18, 1981, at around 6:30 a.m. They discovered the lifeless body of Oxnard College student Rachel Zendejas, a 20-year-old single mother of 2. Rachel lived in an apartment building on Mobile Avenue, directly across the street from where her terrible destiny was waiting for her. She had recently gone through a divorce. Rachel, who lived in an apartment with her brother and 2 daughters, was tragically killed in the complex's garage. As soon as they got to the scene of the crime, law officers collected important evidence that would help with their investigation. When investigators dug deeper into the case, they discovered that Rachel had gone out the night before her murder to find babysitters to watch her small girls. After leaving off the babysitters and heading back home the next morning, Rachel was attacked by her attacker as she got out of her car. Heartbreaking and puzzling were the circumstances surrounding her murder. In their years-long pursuit of justice, the police never stopped pursuing leads and looked into every possibility. But in the end, all leads were worn out, and the investigation went cold despite their unwavering efforts. The unsolved murder of Rachel Zendegas left her family and the community in a condition of hopelessness. However, a neighbor's call to the police in the early hours of December 12, 1981, would rekindle optimism just before the year ended. The inquiry was revived after the Naval reported a fire outbreak at an Oxnard residence. The Oxnard Fire Department quickly went to the scene after getting the emergency call and put out the roaring fire. Later on in their inquiry, they came upon a disturbing find. Lisa Gondek, a 21-year-old lady, was discovered dead and naked in the bathtub of her apartment. She had clearly been the victim of a horrific crime because her attacker had not only sexually assaulted and strangled her, but also set the apartment on fire. Surprisingly, her neighbors heard her shouts loudly, but they didn't notify the authorities until the smoke started to smell strong. Lisa Gondek, an Oxnard resident and retail employee, had spent the evening of December 11, 1981, at a club at the Port Wynham Naval Installation. Around 1:30 a.m., after spending time at the disco with her pals, she was left off at her house. The following day, she was tragically found dead in her bathtub, and for many years afterward, no one knew who killed her. Originally, Louis Gondek left Connecticut for Oxnard in order to spend 2 weeks visiting a buddy who was serving in the U.S. Navy. Even so, months before her tragic death, she finally decided to go to Oxnard. She had half promised her loved ones that she would spend Christmas with them before she passed away, saying, "Mom, I'll be home for Christmas." Lisa Gondek went to Oxnard and took up residence with her best friend from childhood. She was hired by the Aspen Eye Retail Mall to work at a teen apparel store. She made new acquaintances fast, even though she was new to the neighborhood. Lisa's roommate said that in addition to being kind-hearted, she was also attractive on the inside and exterior. Her roommate said Lisa would gladly share $1 with you if she had one. At first, separate investigations were carried out into the instances of Lisa Gondek and Rachel Zendegas. On the other hand, the FBI's combined DNA index system received the suspect's DNA in 2002 when it was discovered at Rachel Zendegas' crime scene. We searched the criminal database for convicts, but regrettably we were unable to find any. However, in 2004, after using DNA testing, the investigators working on Lisa Gondek's case notified the Ventura County Sheriff's Office that a single suspect was connected to the murders of both Rachel Zendegas and Lisa Gondek. Sadly, the DNA test yielded no identifying information about the culprit, and the investigation was once again abandoned. The fact that both women had been to a nightclub named Huntington in the hours before their deaths made for an additional fascinating connection. Across from the Esplanade Mall, this once popular nightclub is now shuttered. The Ventura County Cold Case Unit resumed control of the investigations in December 2019. To find prospective relatives of the suspects, they used genetic genealogy and advanced sort of DNA testing. This strategy produced fresh leads, and subsequently, DNA testing verified Tony Garcia's identity as the main suspect in both killings. Ironically, Tony Garcia had been residing in Oxnard for more than 40 years, right beneath the detective's nose. He was stationed at Point Magoo, close to Oxnard, and had served in the U.S. Navy. He was born in Roswell, New Mexico. Despite being released from the military in 1980, Tony Garcia made the decision to stay in Oxnard, where he followed his love of Carowit and spent many years as a committed learner and teacher. Tony Garcia worked as a carpenter at the time of his arrest. It is still unclear if he was acquainted in any way with his victims before. In addition to the 2 murder accusations against him, Tony Garcia was also accused of killing someone while participating in a rape and killing someone while abducting someone. When he appeared in court for the first time, the order was to hold him without bond. After Tony Gash was apprehended, Rachel Zendegas' brother Roy Rodriguez stated, "I'm going to finish Rachel's case and accomplish my goal." Moving on to the next case. Marceline Eliza. Marceline Eliza was sent to a hospital in Pensacola, Florida, without any prior information about her condition. Sadly, it was too late since on December 31st, the next day, she passed away. An autopsy revealed that the little child had suffered a brain injury. But what had really happened that awful night? And why did poor Marcelino have to go through such a tragedy? Niceville, Florida is well known for its welcoming small-town vibe. There, locals can enjoy a usually calm environment while exploring a range of recreational and historic monuments. Imagine visiting a historically protected place or going for a stroll around a park. The town's reputation for being nice, not just in name, but in spirit, is often enhanced by the warm and welcoming nature of its residents. But the crime rate, which is prevalent but not particularly high, slightly offsets the city's assets. This seemingly peaceful environment was the scene of Marcelino Liza's terrible case. Marcelina Lisa entered the world on December 15, 2000. She brought happiness into Mary Jane Lisa's life when she entered. Marcelina was a vibrant little girl during her brief life. Her broad, curious eyes were framed by her black hair and plump cheeks. She was residing with her mother, Mary Jean Lisa's Tundra Care, in Niceville, Florida as of 2002. The identity of her father is still a mystery. Marcelino was a happy toddler who lived with her mother in a close-knit community. Unbeknownst to everyone, young Marcelina will regrettably experience difficult times shortly. On the morning of December 30th, 2002, Marcelina Lisa and her mother Mary Jean appear to be going about their daily lives in the Niceville, Florida home. A 2-year-old's routine usually centers on enjoying the small things in life, such as breakfast and playing with a favorite toy. Marcelina's day would have begun as any other, with her mother Mary caring for her as she did from the day of her birth. But December 30th, 2002 was a terribly unusual day. Marcelina's mother Mary noticed a sudden and disconcerting change when her daughter went into a seizure and lost consciousness. Marcelino was taken to a hospital in Pensacola, Florida, during a panic attack. Marcelino's condition was serious at this point, and there was little hope even with the best efforts of the medical team. The following day, on December 31st, 2002, Marcelino unfortunately died away at the early age of 2. Her mother immediately felt the terrible weight of this loss. She was truly and deeply saddened. Mary's family members reported the incident to the police right away, as it seemed like Marcelino's death was a homicide. Following Marcelino's untimely demise, detectives descended onto the scene. They began by questioning Marcelino's mother, Mary, and the medical personnel who had attended to the small youngster. Pretty soon, a frightening image emerged. Marcelino was covered with multiple wounds, including 18 bruises on her thin body. The medical examiner concluded, following an examination, that the cause of death was blunt force head trauma, which was consistent with homicide. At the time, the police had no new suspects or leads. In an attempt to find out exactly what had occurred to Marcelino, they put Mary under intense questioning. But Mary was certain that she could not remember any specifics of the event, and that she had no idea how her child had passed away. On November 6, 2003, during a second round of interrogation, Mary's account was altered. She told the cops she might have accidentally injured her child when she lost consciousness in a fit of wrath. Mary was now the primary suspect in Marcelino's death as a result of her statement. But proving her guilt was a difficult process. The evidence at hand did not provide a clear connection between her and the crime. A comprehensive investigation was carried out, and several witnesses were questioned by the investigators. They learned that Mary was known for having a very bad temper. However, there had been no prior mention of her experiencing blackouts. Although this new evidence was useful, it was still not enough to conclusively identify Mary as the murderer. Tragically, Marcelino's case began to stagnate as the leads became stale and the evidence was still circumstantial, eventually turning into a cold case, leaving the community in quest of closure and justice for a young life stolen far too soon. Almost 2 decades had passed since Marceline Eliza's terrible death, but Captain David Allen of the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office and his dedicated team of detectives were not going to let this cold case go unanswered. After almost 19 years, they decided it was time to review all of the information pertaining to Marcelino's death. The group proceeded methodically. They wanted to examine the facts with a new perspective, questioning all of their assumptions and raising doubts about others. They got in touch with the medical examiner's office to request a fresh evaluation of the case. Could there have been a mistake in the original analysis somewhere? Captain Allen and his group were keen to find out the response. A noteworthy event occurred in April of 2021. After a thorough autopsy, the medical examiner determined that Selena had suffered from shaken baby syndrome, which was a devastating discovery. This disorder usually arises when a parent or other adult who is caring for a child shakes them violently out of exasperation or anger, which is often triggered by the child's incessant movement. This severe shaking causes the child's brain to move back and forth inside the skull, which causes bruising, swelling, and often fatal brain hemorrhage. This case was re-evaluated with consideration for variables beyond the medical. The detective squad under Captain Allen's command knew they needed more. They conducted new interviews and combed through old records. All of a sudden, they were pounding on doors and talking to anyone who could possibly have the last few pieces to this awful puzzle. Marcelino's mother allegedly told detectives after Marcelino died that she had blacked out and didn't know how her daughter had died. However, as additional witnesses came forward, the detectives started to hear an alternative story. As the evidence grew, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the pieces were fitting together to create a disturbing picture. Captain Allen, who was in possession of the recently acquired evidence and testimony, addressed the media and stated, "We were able to submit an arrest warrant for felony murder on the mother based on the evidence we had in new interviews." When police arrived to take Mary Jean into jail on September 23, 2022, nearly 20 years after the untimely death of her daughter Marcelino, one can only image how shocked she was. Following the death of her daughter, Mary moved to California. There, she was taken into custody by Yuba County Sheriff's Department deputies. Without being granted bond, she was held at the Yuba County Jail. Later, the authorities brought her back to Okaloosa County, Florida, where she was to face at least one murder accusation. Eric Aiden, the sheriff for Okaloosa County, stated that his detectives are driven to find a solution to these unresolved crimes. It's more than simply a job to them. They are passionate about their duty in delivering justice, which is why they are dedicated to looking for any piece of information that can shed light on a case that has stagnated. Thanks to the detectives' painstaking efforts, this case has given fresh life to a nearly 2-decade-old tragedy, maybe bringing justice and closure to young Marceline Eliza. Mary Jean Lisa was born in 1985, right in the middle of a terrible storm. She was a woman of Asian or Pacific Island descent, 38 years old. After her daughter passed away, Mary lived for a few years in 2324 Britannia Circle in Navarre, Florida. Mary gave the impression of having a typical existence, yet she was well known for having a fiery temper. This trait, which tainted many of her contacts, was characteristic of her relationships. Her outburst was more than just irritation. It was an explosive personality feature that was dominant. Regretfully, nobody in her life appeared to be able to manage this side of her. Despite Mary's lack of criminal background, she has now tragically run afoul of the law due to her age. She has never before been found guilty of a crime. Thus, she finds herself at a difficult crossroads that nobody could have foreseen. The terrible occurrence that led to her incarceration is still being processed by friends, neighbors, and other community members. Police were called immediately to find out what went so terribly wrong. The specifics of this story shed light on the unfortunate circumstances surrounding the death of Marceline Eliza, a small toddler. The arrest report's details shed light on a dysfunctional family dynamic that ultimately came to an awful end. Marcelina's mother, Mary Jean Lisa, already had a case registered with the Florida Department of Children and Families and did not have primary custody of her at the time. The principal protectors of Marcelino, whose identities remain undisclosed, were organizing a trip outside of town. Because they value family, the Department of Children and Families granted Mary Jane permission to stay with Marcelino for an extended amount of time. The December 20th, 2002 was the date the agreement came into force. The visit appeared to be going well for the first few days. A caseworker visited the home 3 days after the overnight stay began. During the visits, Marcelino was observed by the caseworker to be healthy, active, and free from signs of injury or discomfort. When Mary Jean's sister came to visit the residence a few days later, on December 29th, she too saw that the child was safe and well. Then came December 30th, 2002. This would prove to be both an important and terrible day. This particular day, Mary Jean was at home by herself with her daughter. Later, an unidentified witness picked them up and saw something fishy straight away. Marcelino was sleepy and unresponsive. Out of worry, the witness asked Marcelino about his health from Mary Jean. In response, Mary Jean said that Marcelino had been sick for a few days. Despite the illness, Mary Jean had not taken her daughter to the doctor. As the day wore on, things continued to deteriorate. After Mary Jean changed Marcelino's diaper, a horrifying sequence of events took place. Marcelino's respiration ceased as she began to convulse. In an attempt to get the young girl medical attention, the witness and Mary Jean hurried her to Twin Cities Hospital in Niceville. Upon examination, it was discovered that she had 18 contusions in all. Subsequent CT scans showed evidence of brain atrophy and persistent blood clots on the brain surface. As a result, Sacred Heart Hospital in Pensacola received her. Sadly, though, she did not make it. Mary was kept in the desolate Hubert County Jail without being allowed to post bond while she awaited her court appearance. Her official name, Mary Jean Lisa, was stated there. A date was handed to her to record on her calendar, February 13th, 2023. It became increasingly clear how bad her situation was, and the date was meant to be a pre-trial meeting rather than a trial. This was an important phase in the legal process. During this vital pre-trial session, the judge would meet with the prosecution and defense. Typically, they discuss the evidence, consider potential plea agreements, and establish the parameters for the trial's course. Mary's life would change significantly after this conference, potentially affecting how she would develop in the future. Since they haven't been made public yet, the contents of what transpired during Mary's pre-trial meeting are now being maintained under strict confidentiality. Without second thought, Sheriff Eric Aiden took a few minutes to address the neighborhood over Marceline Eliza's unsolved murder. He expressed his gratitude to the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office investigators for their steadfast dedication. In particular, he conveyed his gratitude for the Criminal Investigative Division's unwavering commitment to the matter. Sheriff Aiden stressed how eager he and his colleagues are to re-examine past situations. They adopt a strong position. They are dedicated to looking, learning, and probing, even if there isn't an immediate solution. Their mission is to collect any information, no matter how small, that could lead them to a breakthrough in the cold case investigations. The Marceline Elisa case is the clearest example of this spirit of tenacity. It demonstrated the extent the group would go to ensure that justice was carried out. As information became available and the community looked for a solution, families, friends, and neighbors felt obliged to get in touch, reiterating their belief in the police and their search for the truth. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe Mary Angeliza killed her kid by... Moving on to the next case. Philip Kahn. On July 24th, 2000, a male body that was unknown was found not far from the Grand Manan Banks, about 27 miles off the coast of Maine. The discovery of this body puzzled the detectives because there were no clear leads. Following an autopsy, DNA and fingerprints were taken from the remains. The fingerprints were turned over to the FBI, but no matches were found at the time. The matter remained unresolved for more than 20 years until a miraculous development in 2023. The victims' relatives were relieved when the human bones found off the coast of Maine were eventually identified. But the identification left them with more questions than answers. What crucial details were found that, after more than 20 years, made it possible to identify the unidentified man? Is there any video evidence linking the body that was found to the Atlantic Ocean along the Maine coast? Maine is well known for its charming and majestic beauty. It is well known for its rocky shoreline and for having a picturesque lighthouse landscape. Situated near the Canadian border, the Grand Manon Banks are a few miles offshore from the coast of Maine. The area has a long history of being associated with marine myths and stories, adding to its already intriguing character. Stories of ghosts, ships, and unexplained happenings have long captivated sailors and coastal dwellers. The Grand Manon Banks are situated in a stunning area, but they are also near an area with erratic weather patterns and hazardous waters. Only a cautious and deliberate exploration of this subject is warranted. The region as a whole has the lowest rate of crime when compared to other U.S. states. Despite the area's safe surrounds, a horrible occurrence occurred there in 2000. On July 24th, 2000, several human remains were found in the Maine area close to Grand Manon Banks. The partially skeletonized skeletal remains were found by local voters. Experts saw that the person was dressed casually, with a blue knit shirt, a warm jacket, and a digital watch on their wrist when they carefully extracted the remains from the water. Even after these personal belongings were found, the most crucial piece of information, the person's identity, remains a mystery. Because of the damage caused by the hostile maritime environment to the remains, it was difficult to determine the cause of death or the circumstances surrounding the person's passing. The Chief Medical Examiner's main office obtained DNA and fingerprint samples and conducted an autopsy in an attempt to identify the dead. This was not a successful first effort. The FBI was subsequently contacted with the fingerprints, but no matches were discovered. The FBI's combined DNA index system also received a sample of the sample, but no matches were discovered there either. During the preliminary investigation, investigators were able to determine that the remains belonged to a male. They most likely came to this conclusion based on the clothes and other objects they discovered around. The individual also had a number of serious chronic conditions, such as nephrosclerosis, cardiac hypertrophy, and emphysema, according to the post-mortem results. However, an exact cause of death could not be determined despite a thorough inquiry. He was then officially given the John Doe moniker, which is an anonymous placeholder used by law enforcement when a true identity is unknown. The study and identification of these human remains took years, but regrettably, not much progress was accomplished. The case remained unresolved in the end, despite the police and law enforcement agencies' best efforts. About 20 years after the human remains were discovered off the coast of Maine, the case was resurrected for further examination. In an attempt to identify the man, the Chief Medical Examiner asked Parabon Nanolabs for assistance in conducting analysis and trying forensic genealogy. The mystery remained, even after Parabon Nanolab examined the DNA and conducted forensic genealogy testing. The discovery that the male's remains belonged to an Ashkenazi Jew with Jewish lineage provided additional information for the study. This lead did not yield any helpful information or possible sources to find out the man's name or the identities of his family until 3 years later. New optimism was created when the Deceased Persons Identification Services Division, the Chief Medical Examiner's Office, and the FBI's Criminal Justice Information Services convened in March 2022. They used the cutting-edge tools that the FBI had provided to re-examine the fingerprints found on the unidentified person. This second glance revealed an incredible finding. Remarkably, the unidentified person's fingerprints matched those of an 84-year-old retired Las Vegas taxi driver named Philip Kahn when the deceased person's fingerprints were transmitted to identification services in May 2022. Hopefully, the investigation was finally drawing to a close. In an attempt to find out more, detectives produced and released a composite sketch earlier in 2019. But regrettably, no additional information was found. But after the identification was completed, it was later found that the composite sketch bore a striking resemblance to the photo of Philip Kahn that the medical examiner's office had released. The long-awaited truth finally surfaced. The news of Philip Kahn's remains being found brought both relief and sadness to his family. They had been in the dark for years, not knowing what had happened to Philip Kahn. In 1916, Philip Kahn was born in Manhattan. His early years are not widely documented. He did, however, have two brothers and a sister. He reportedly changed his last name from Ehrlichman, which was hard to spell, to Kahn after he was born. He was raised in impoverished conditions during the Great Depression, but as he traveled the trains in pursuit of work, he strengthened his resolve. After falling in love with Gina Oliver in Florida many years later at the start of the 1960s, they eventually moved in together in a mobile home park in Las Vegas. Philip Kahn was renowned for his towering presence, infectious happiness, and penchant for warm weather. He was affectionately called Stretch. Among his peers in the Las Vegas cab industry, Philip's struggles in life did not break his spirit. He liked to dance, and he and Jean took life one day at a time. Kahn was a superb swimmer as well. His and his wife's previous appearance as extras in the film Rain Man served as more evidence of his good humor. He was 84 years old and still going strong in 2000. He always had a unique perspective while tackling issues. Philip Kahn's desire to explore unconventional treatment options instead of surgery was evident from his fantasies about holistic care in Coral Gables, Florida, despite his secret illness. Philip Kahn had barely gotten out of bed when he unexpectedly revealed something to his family early on July 9, 2000. Philip decided to take off on his own and fly to Florida. He said that he was seeking complementary medicine to address a persistent health concern. As the days went by, his stepdaughter Judy and wife Jean in particular experienced worry and anxiety. Philip vanished from sight and was never heard from again after that terrible day. In a state of panic, the family looked everywhere for clues as to where he may be. On July 21st, 2000, the family reported Philip missing to the Metropolitan Police Department, having run out of choices for 12 days. An original missing person report contained the last known details concerning Philip's activities, including his departure from home on July 9, 2000, and the travel to the airport. The moment the missing report was turned in, the police began their investigation. Philip reportedly left his home at 7 on July 9, 2000, and was driven to McCarran International Airport by a neighbor. He informed his family that he was traveling to Coral Gables, Florida, for integrative medicine treatment in case of a potential aortic embolism. As the investigation went on, it became clear that Philip Kahn had not only unexpectedly disappeared, but also had exhibited a number of odd behaviors before going missing. Documents show that Philip had designated his wife Jean as his power of attorney in addition to others. In addition, he had written letters, paid money to his sister, and sold all he owned. To further muddle matters, there was a new Visa credit card that Jean was unaware of. All of these things put the family in a state of bewilderment. They questioned why these decisions were taken. The family was coping with uncertainty and no clues when they received a shocking disclosure from the Metropolitan Police Department. Airline records revealed that Philip had actually gone to New York, not the place he had originally informed his family he was going. The family eventually discovered that Philip Kahn's airline ticket cost $162 when the detectives looked it over. This news confused them even more, leading them to wonder what had gone wrong for him to go off course. The cops also questioned his family about his desire to end his life, but there was no indication that he intended to end his own life. Judy, his stepdaughter, asserted that Philip did not exhibit these characteristics. She claimed that Philip had just decided to face his health problems head-on and come up with a new plan of action. Judy stated in an interview that she didn't feel that he had such inclinations, nor did her mother. Thankfully, Philip's remains could be identified thanks to forensic genealogy. When someone who has been without a name for a long time is finally given one, the medical examiner's office witnesses a very wonderful moment, even if the procedure of identifying these deceased victims can be challenging and drawn out, supplying solace to families. The conclusion of Cold Cases emphasizes the significance of holding out hope in the search for justice for the missing and unidentified. It reminds us of the detectives' unwavering commitment to cracking these cases and burying the dead, no matter how challenging the road may be. The successful application of forensic genetic genealogy in this case is another illustration of how improvements in DNA technology have enabled the forensic sciences to advance. The discovery that the body belonged to Philip Kahn brought his family closure after more than 20 years. It brought back memories and a sense of relief for his loved ones. Judy, Kahn's stepdaughter, was both grateful and perplexed to hear what had happened to him. Judy thought about the uncertainty that lingered. She said, "We have more questions than answers." The news of Philip Kahn's demise reminded her mother, Jean Oliver, of their brief but abruptly terminated connection when he vanished. The years of conjecture and searching had come to an end, which comforted the family as much as devastated them. Jean, a beloved preschool teacher, continued to disappear for several years after her husband's abduction. She died in December 2007 at the age of 89. She experienced the normal emotional upheaval that comes with having a husband go. Still, she persisted with grace and strength. Jean endured an emotional roller coaster, but she refused to let the disappearance define her life. She continued to live life to the fullest, cherishing the recollections of the life she had built with Philip. Judy said she was amazed by her mother's strength during those difficult times. She claimed that despite the never-ending inquiries and heartache, Jean was able to reclaim her feeling of normalcy and continued living her life. The chief of the medical examiner's office, Lindsay Chastain, shared her thoughts on the significance of this identification. "We're overjoyed to have located him and to be able to inform the family of their loved one's fate." After bearing the burden of ignorance for a considerable amount of time, the family was finally able to obtain some answers. She stated that there are still a lot of unsolved questions regarding the case. Lindsay points out that nobody is ever going to know how Philip got to the place where he was found. This unsolved question still adds to the mystery. That the body found belonged to Philip Kahn, however, has finally brought the family some sense of consolation. This provides a feeling of closure to a chapter that has been open for far too long. What are your thoughts on the case? What is the true fate of Philip Kahn? And why did he misrepresent his travels to his family? Please share your opinions with us in the comment section. Moving on to the next case. Matthias Nowitzki. 30-year-old Matthias Nowitzki was a resident and employee of Hanover, Germany. Southeast Poland's Hutkopf is a little village where he was born and reared. He had relocated to Germany in search of employment and had worked as a construction worker for around 5 years. He shared a home in Hanover with his father, who worked as well. The rest of his family was based in Kharkov, Poland. Marty Jus was engaged to his fiancée, who resided in the northwest Polish village of Lipia Góra in a long-distance relationship. His fiancée was expecting her first child at the time. Mateusz made the decision to pay her and his family a visit in Poland because her due date was drawing near. His excitement at his daughter's arrival was contagious. Mateusz drove his 1998 BMW from his Hanover, Germany residence at 11:30 p.m. on March 28, 2018, after work to Lipia Góra, Poland. After a 647-kilometer drive from Hanover to Lipia Góra, Mateusz was expected to arrive the next morning between 8 and 9 a.m. Mateusz, however, never arrived at Lipia Góra. On March 29th, the next morning at around 10:30, his father called Mateusz. Mateusz informed him that he had been stuck in heavy traffic for the past 2 hours owing to accidents and that there was extremely bad traffic on the way. He said he was in the vicinity of Szczecin to his father. Szczecin is a town on the Polish-German border, approximately 214 kilometers from Lipia Góra. He texted his fiancée at that time to let her know he would be there in roughly 2 hours. This would be everyone's final interaction with him. He never made it to his fiancée's residence. His fiancée became concerned later that night since he had not yet made it home and his cell phone calls were not being returned. At about 5 p.m., his fiancée made the decision to phone Mateusz's sister, who was also a Hanover resident. However, she had also been unsuccessful in contacting him. His phone was unreachable by anyone. Even when his phone rang, he would never answer it. Mateusz's mother reported him missing to the police that evening. However, the police declined to make a report because they said Mateusz would probably show up and that not much time had gone. When Mateusz hadn't returned home after a day, his family filed missing reports with the Polish and German authorities. But as long as Polish police were looking into the matter, German police would not look into it. Throughout the course of the case investigation, this discrepancy between the police in the two nations is evident. The family would request that Mateusz's cell phone be located by the Polish police. When Mateusz vanished, his phone remained on for 2 days. But because he was using a German SIM card, the Polish police said they were unable to track his cell phone. Mateusz vanished in Poland. And in the meantime, the German authorities claimed they were unable to find his phone either. Mateusz's phone was never connected to a Polish network, according to later claims made by the Polish authorities. Nobody still knows Mateusz's whereabouts when his father phoned him. The family, fed up with the cops, made the decision to conduct their own search and inquiry. In addition to searching the full path Mateusz would have walked, and even all the side streets in both Germany and Poland, they put up posters in towns close to the border. In addition, they inquired about video surveillance footage from several businesses along the route, as well as gas station staff. However, they were still unable to locate any indication of his whereabouts. The family frequently appeared in the media and on television, voicing their complaints that the authorities were not investigating Mateusz's whereabouts seriously. People started to question whether Mateusz had departed willingly to begin a new life as time went on. However, Mateusz's family vehemently refuted this, saying that he was thrilled to have his daughter and was engaged to his fiancée. Mateusz would not be found for the following 6 months. Mateusz and his automobile appeared to have disappeared out of thin air. On September 12, 2018, a neighbor in Kharkov, southeastern Poland, visited Mateusz's mother to inform her that their barn had been smelling very foul for some time and that their neighbors were beginning to voice their concerns. The neighbors initially believed it to be a dead animal, but they were unable to locate it despite looking all over the barn. Eventually, the neighbor would ask Mateusz's mother whether he might look beneath the barn's roof. A room and an attic above it were created by walling off half of the barn. When Mateusz's mother gave her okay, the neighbor came upstairs and discovered a heap of clothing. He discovered, upon closer examination, that it was, in fact, a dead human body. The body was missing its torso and head. In addition, there were 2 distinct noses suspended from the roof and a backpack lying on the ground. It was difficult to identify the body due to its advanced condition of decomposition, but Mateusz's possessions were discovered in the barn. In the end, Mateusz Kawecki was recognized as the deceased. One peculiar aspect of the case was that, in March, Mateusz was traveling to the home of his fiancée in northwestern Poland rather than his family's home in southeastern Poland. The 2 houses are about 635 kilometers apart. And how did Mateusz's body wind up in the barn belonging to his family? All of his possessions were given to his family by the police, who declared his death to be a suicide. The family discovered a Polish water bottle, an orange juice box, and a cigarette put inside Mateusz's rucksack. Mateusz's relatives said he detested orange juice and would never have purchased it. Without doing a comprehensive analysis, the police had released each item to the family, and his car has never been located. He had his car registration and keys in the rucksack, but his wallet was nowhere to be seen. When the family looked through his recent conversations, they discovered that Mateusz had made one more call to his uncle on March 30th. the day after he had allegedly gone missing. His phone would be discovered among his possessions. Given that the call to his uncle lasted for less than a second and did not reach his uncle's phone, it is assumed that the call was made accidentally. Mateusz's relatives discovered his shoe in the barn with his severed foot still inside 4 days after his body was discovered. This demonstrates the police's negligence, which has been evident throughout the case. The evidence was not well gathered by the police. And why was the severed foot never mentioned during the autopsy? In addition, Mateusz's teeth were knocked out and appeared to be plastered on his clothing with blood when his body was discovered. Although the decomposition of the body may have led to the head being severed after it was suspended on the rope for some time, this still doesn't explain why his teeth fell out of his mouth and onto his shirt. There appeared to be blood on his clothes as well. Despite this, it was challenging to tell them apart because of how filthy their clothes were. Moreover, the bottom floor of the barn had a clear view of the attic where his body was discovered hanging. The family said that despite using the barn all summer, they were unaware that his body was still inside. Which also begs the question of how Mateusz entered the barn, given that it is normally closed and that no one saw Mateusz or anyone else exploring the area trying to enter. A prosecutor who was not conducting an investigation into the matter stated on a television program that they had discovered a Polish public transportation ticket that was dated after his purported disappearance. Mateusz committed himself, according to the police, despite a mountain of evidence suggesting foul play was involved in his death. They have declined to look into the matter further. The family thinks it was a homicide because they don't think he would commit suicide. Mateusz's mysterious death is still unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Jennifer Watkins. On November 6, 1999, Michael Watkins, Jennifer's husband, called the Fountain Police Department to report her missing when Jennifer failed to return home after her shift at the Memorial Hospital. That same day, after her daughter neglected to pick up the children, Jennifer Watkins' grandmother, Irene Skinner, who watches her grandkids, called the Colorado Springs Police Department. The Colorado Springs Police Department filed a missing persons report almost immediately. Detectives and investigative patrol officers interviewed Jennifer Watkins' family members and co-workers multiple times during the preliminary inquiry. With Michael Watkins' assistance, officers were able to find Jennifer Watkins' vehicle in an employee parking lot near Printers Parkway in East Ikes Peak Avenue. The car was seized, but the subsequent search turned up no clues or pieces of evidence related to Jennifer Watkins' disappearance. Interviewing staff members at the Memorial Hospital where Jennifer Watkins worked, the investigators are still looking for her. On November 8, 1999, when they were visiting the hospital, detectives got information at around 10 in the morning that a body had been found in a still under construction area of the facility beneath a stairwell. 2 Dover elevator service employees appeared to have entered the 8th floor stairs to inspect and mend an elevator shaft that required attention. The moment they arrived at the stairwell area, they noticed a very distinct and disagreeable stench. The elevator workers saw what looked to be the silhouette of a body wrapped in plastic and secured with duct tape when they looked beneath the stairway. Investigators from the Metro Crime Lab, the El Paso County Coroner's Office, and the Colorado Springs Police Department homicide team visited the scene right away upon request. Investigators discovered a deceased adult white woman with brown hair after removing the plastic. The victim had on a teal uniform smock, black slacks, and a purple shirt. The way her clothes were arranged, it appeared as though she had been sexually assaulted. Throughout the investigation, detectives spoke with a number of Memorial Hospital employees and contractors. Despite investigating more possible suspect leads, no suspect was discovered. The El Paso County Coroner's Office quickly finished the adult female deceased autopsy, and it revealed that she was 23-year-old Jennifer Watkins, who had vanished out of the blue a few days prior. Jennifer had died from blunt force injuries to the head, according to David Bowerman, El Paso's coroner at the time. It was concluded that she was killed. The inquiry into who killed for years, Jennifer Watkins pestered her family and the police. William and Irene Skinner welcomed Jennifer Lee Watkins into the world on November 24, 1975, in Methuen, Massachusetts. Being the second of four siblings, she had a particular place in her heart for her youngest brother, Joseph. Hanover, Colorado High School awarded Jennifer her high school diploma. She delighted in taking care of her pets and interacting with friends. Jennifer had a passion for helping people and enjoyed playing volleyball. She joined the school band as a clarinetist because she loved music. Jennifer Watkins had always wanted to be a nurse. The 8th of April, 1995 saw the marriage of her and Michael Watkins. And around 3 years later, Michael got a job at Colorado Springs Memorial Hospital as a maintenance employee. Jennifer was employed there as a nutritionist shortly after that. The detectives did not stop trying to get Jennifer's family justice. A detailed examination of the plastic used to wrap Jennifer Watkins' body during the crime scene processing revealed some hairs, fibers, and a yellowish-white discoloration that was subsequently determined to be cement. Additional biological evidence was also obtained during the autopsy. Many pieces of evidence were sent to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for review. 2 more DNA profiles were generated from the evidence items submitted for processing, in addition to the victim's DNA profile. These profiles were made using the plastic wrap, the victim's pants, and semen samples obtained during the autopsy. The semen discovered in Jennifer Watkins' jeans and the plastic wrap matched one another, but the samples obtained during the autopsy did not. Biological samples were gathered from several possible suspects, all of whom were cleared since their DNA did not match the 2 unidentified samples. Despite the hospital's extensive security camera installation, the images were too grainy to be of much use. When there were no leads, police initially focused on anyone who had access to the crime scene. They then turned their focus on Michael Watkins, a night shift employee in the hospital's housekeeping department. Jennifer Watkins' mother, Irene Skinner, harbored reservations about Michael. Irene claimed that after her daughter moved in with her husband, Michael Watkins, with whom she had gone to elementary school, her life took a different turn. According to Irene Skinner, Michael Watkins battled drug misuse, and domestic abuse sometimes necessitated several trips for Jennifer to the emergency room. Michael Watkins had a turbulent relationship with Jennifer and a violent personality, but he had also run afoul of the law in the past due to mischief and an incident involving a pallet gun. Nonetheless, as the investigation went on, he was questioned more than once, and he cooperated completely with every step of the process. Given that his DNA was discovered on Jennifer Watkins' body, Michael acknowledged having an affair with her, but he denied that he had killed her. When they searched Michael Watkins' house with a warrant in hand, they found a pair of jeans that seemed to be bloodstained. It was blood an examination of the thing showed, but it was Michael's blood. There were no answers found in the 2 DNA samples that were retrieved from the crime scene. Since Michael was married to Jennifer, it didn't matter if the sample from her body matched Michael's DNA. It remained uncertain what the other plastic-derived DNA sample was. Michael Watkins complied with the police's request to take a polygraph exam and passed it. Though Michael remained a suspect, the investigators considered alternative options. They concentrated on a male hospital worker who, following Jennifer's murder, abruptly and inexplicably left the town without giving notice or collecting his last salary. Detectives quickly learned throughout the inquiry that the man was on probation for a Louisiana murder that he said was committed in self-defense. Upon being apprehended by the authorities, he denied any connection to the murder of Jennifer Watkins and agreed to donate a sample of his DNA. However, his DNA did not match the samples found at the scene of Jennifer's murder. After a comprehensive inquiry, no suspect was identified, and the case eventually became cold. For the past 21 years, numerous detectives have attempted, but been unsuccessful, to identify a culprit in the case of Jennifer Watkins. For a while, Jennifer's case was unresolved. Technological developments in the field of family DNA analysis have taken place over time. In order to ascertain the physical attributes and lineage of the unexplained DNA evidence at the crime site, cold case detectives employed DNA phenotyping between 2017 and 2018 with the assistance of Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based DNA technology company. Jennifer Watkins's genes contained DNA evidence that was used to predict the suspect features. Parabon estimated the suspect's ancestry, skin tone, freckles, hair color, eyes, and facial shape individually. These physical attributes were combined to build a snapshot composite that depicts the suspect's appearance at age 25 and with an average body mass index of 22. These default values were used because age and body mass index cannot be determined from DNA. After that, this picture was made public in an attempt to gather leads. The evidence revealed that the murderer was approximately 25 years old at the time of the crime, had blonde or brown hair, blue or green eyes, and fair skin. But after utilizing genetic genealogy to narrow down the culprit, investigators were able to concentrate on an individual whom police had really questioned in 1999. Ricky Severette was the murderer. A review of the original case report reveals that investigators questioned 29-year-old Ricky Siebert on November 19, 1999 as part of the first homicide inquiry. He worked for Memorial Hospital as an employee in the maintenance department. April 1998 was when he began working there. On November 5, 1999, the day Jennifer Watkins was last seen, Ricky Sever gave an account of his work schedule, which indicated that he was a swing shift worker. When questioned, he also denied ever having met Jennifer Watkins. Sadly, more inquiry has shown that Ricky Sever died in a car accident on November 2, 2001, 2 years after Jennifer Watkins was killed on Highway 94 just east of Colorado Springs. Nevertheless, the culprit has now been found. Nonetheless, the suspect's surviving family provided DNA samples to the investigators. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation estimates that 99.994% of the population may not have contributed any DNA to the samples taken in this case. It implies that Ricky Siebert is not negotiable. The case of Jennifer Watkins was accepted by the 4th Judicial District Attorney's Office on October 1, 2020 for review. That Ricky Siebert killed Jennifer Watkins is a certainty, according to the District Attorney's Office. Since Ricky Siebert passed away in a car accident in 2001, the inquiry into the murder of Jennifer Watkins will be closed as exceedingly clear were death of the perpetrator. We are happy to be able to finally provide the Jennifer Watkins family with the answers they deserve after all these years. We will never give up on serving our community, no matter how long it takes. And I am proud of all the cold case investigators who have worked nonstop for the past 21 years. Miss Watkins made sure they never lost sight of the fact that discovering the truth for the Watkins family was the most essential thing. And to our partners, we are grateful. Vince Neese, chief of the Colorado Springs Police Department, said, "Without your time, skill, and dedication, we would not have been able to solve this case." Thanks for watching.